Hello, my dear friends. How are you doing? Hope you are having an amazing day and not having to deal with drama. Ready for new stories I have for you today? Let's go to the first one. Buckle up, as it's a long one, and don't forget to listen to the end of the story to hear my insights. Enjoy the stories, guys, and please like and subscribe. And of course, don't forget to leave a comment.
Growing up, I thought I had the perfect family. My mom was amazing. She was warm, nurturing, and the kind of woman who would light up a room with her smile. She worked as a school teacher, and I have so many memories of her coming home after a long day, somehow still having the energy to help me with homework, listen to my day, and make dinner. She was everything you'd want in a mother. My dad, on the other hand, was always a bit more distant. He worked in real estate, so he was constantly either at work or networking at dinners or events. When he was home, he wasn't very present. His mind always seemed to be elsewhere, usually glued to his phone or computer. But he provided for us and made sure we were financially comfortable. I guess, as a kid, I didn't think much of his emotional distance because I had my mom to fill that gap. When I was 19, my world started to crumble. My mom was diagnosed with late-stage ovarian cancer. It was aggressive, and by the time it was caught, the doctors told us there wasn't much hope for a cure. She would be going through treatments, but it was more to buy her time than to save her. That was the moment my life started to shift, and it's also the moment I saw the true colors of my father. At first, my dad seemed like he was devastated by the diagnosis, as anyone would be. He took some time off work, went with my mom to doctor's appointments, and even tried to be supportive. But that didn't last long. Within a couple of months, his attitude changed. Instead of being there for her as she went through chemotherapy and all the horrible side effects, he started staying out late again. His business trips became more frequent, and when he was home, he seemed irritated, like he couldn't be bothered to deal with what was happening. I didn't think much of it at first. He's not the most emotionally expressive guy, and maybe this was just how he was coping. But as my mom got sicker and my dad became more absent, I started to realize something wasn't right. Then came the night that changed everything. My mom was having one of her worst days. She could barely get out of bed. She was in immense pain, and I was trying my best to take care of her. I was 20 at the time, still trying to balance college and work part-time, while also spending every free moment at home helping her. That night, I had come back from class, and I was helping my mom with her medication. I heard the front door open. I thought it was my dad, finally coming home after being MIA for days. But when I went to the hallway to greet him, my blood ran cold. There was my father, standing in the doorway with a woman hanging on his arm. She looked younger than him, closer to my age than his, and they were laughing, completely oblivious to the fact that I was standing right there. I was stunned. I had always suspected he might be cheating, but to bring his mistress into the house, into the home where my mother was literally dying, was too much. I confronted him right then and there in shock. I asked him what the hell he was doing and who the hell she was. His response? He looked at me like I was the one out of line. He told me not to overreact and said that his friend was just visiting. That was it, just visiting. I knew what was going on. I wasn't stupid. The woman didn't even bother to act like she wasn't involved with him. She smirked at me, like she knew exactly what kind of power she held over him and over the situation. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw them both out of the house. But my mom was in the next room, and I couldn't bring myself to let her know what was happening. She was too weak to handle any more pain. So I said nothing. I let them pass by me and go into the living room, where they sat and laughed like they were on a date in their private little bubble, while my mother lay dying in the next room. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up checking on my mom, and was thinking about how the man who was supposed to be there for her had chosen to spend his time with another woman. I couldn't believe the betrayal. In the final weeks of my mother's life, my dad's absence became more and more noticeable. He was rarely at home. He didn't even bother to show up to some of her last doctor's appointments. He missed her last Christmas. He claimed he had a work emergency, but I knew better. I knew exactly where he was, with her. I tried to shield my mom from the truth, but I don't know if I was successful. Toward the end, she seemed to sense something was off. She'd ask me where Dad was, and I'd lie, telling her he was at work or out running errands. I couldn't bear the thought of her knowing that the man she loved, the man she was going to leave behind, was cheating on her. My mom passed away peacefully, or at least as peacefully as one can in such circumstances. She died at home, surrounded by her family. Well, me, mostly. My father wasn't there when she took her final breath. He was traveling again, and he didn't make it back in time. I've always believed he chose to be away that day. Maybe it was easier for him to avoid facing the reality of his choices, or maybe he was too far gone in his new relationship to care. Either way, it was unforgivable. You'd think after my mom passed, my dad would feel some level of remorse or grief, but if he did, he sure didn't show it. 3 months after my mom's funeral, my father announced he was getting remarried, to her, the woman he had been seeing while my mom was dying. It felt like a punch in the gut. He sat me down one evening and told me that he and Susan, not her real name, were planning a wedding. He said it so casually, like it was no big deal, like the past year hadn't happened the way it did. He even had the nerve to ask me to be happy for him. I refused to go to the wedding. I couldn't stomach the idea of watching my dad marry the woman who had been part of the worst betrayal I had ever experienced. I cut off most contact with him after that. I tried to distance myself emotionally and physically, but I was still living in the house, finishing up college, and trying to figure out my next steps. But Susan, my new stepmother, wasn't about to let that continue. After the wedding, Susan made it very clear that I wasn't welcome in their home. She never said it outright at first, but she'd make comments about how I was an adult now, and it was time for me to stand on my own 2 feet. She made little digs about how I was still mooching off of my dad by living there, even though I was working part-time and contributing to household expenses as best I could while finishing school. It didn't take long for her passive-aggressive comments to turn into something more direct. One day, I came home from class to find all my things packed up in boxes. My bedroom, my childhood bedroom, was emptied. When I confronted my father about it, he didn't say much. It was Susan who spoke for him. She told me they had decided to rent out my room to make extra income and that I needed to move out immediately, just like that. I was shocked, hurt, and furious. I had nowhere to go. I hadn't even graduated yet, and I was barely making enough money to support myself. But it didn't matter to them. My father, the man who was supposed to protect and support me, had chosen his new wife over me. I was homeless. I stayed with friends for a while, couch surfing until I could afford a small, crappy apartment. My father would send the occasional text, usually about superficial things like holidays or family events. He never once apologized for letting Susan kick me out. He never acknowledged the pain he caused. I didn't respond to most of his messages. I couldn't bring myself to speak to him. Years went by. I finished school, got a job, and started to rebuild my life. I cut contact with my father and Susan, refusing to let their toxicity drag me down anymore. I figured I'd never hear from them again, and honestly, I didn't want to. But then, last year, I got a call from my father out of the blue. I wasn't sure if I even wanted to answer, but curiosity got the better of me. When I picked up, his voice sounded different. He wasn't the confident man I had known growing up. He sounded desperate. He told me that Susan had left him. Apparently, she had been cheating on him with some rich guy she met at the country club they frequented. She had been seeing him for years, all while my dad was clueless, thinking they had a perfect marriage. This guy was loaded, private jets, yachts. She had packed up and left my dad, taking a huge chunk of his money with her. Now, my dad was broke. He had spent so much of his money trying to keep up with Susan's lifestyle, fancy vacations, club memberships, expensive jewelry, that he was now struggling just to keep the house. The same house that he had let Susan kick me out of. The same house where he had betrayed my mom, and now he wanted my help. He had the nerve to ask if I could loan him some money to help him get back on his feet. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of the irony. The same man who had thrown away everything for this woman, who had let her kick me out, was now begging for my help because she had done the exact same thing to him. I told him no. I told him that he made his choices, and now he had to live with the consequences. I didn't owe him anything, and I certainly didn't owe anything to the man who had betrayed my mom and abandoned me. He tried to guilt-trip me, talking about how family should help each other, but I wasn't having it. He hadn't acted like family when I needed him, so why should I act like family now? So, Reddit. Am I the a-hole for refusing to help my father after everything he's done? OP's father chose to betray OP's mother while she was at her most vulnerable, and then he doubled down by letting his new wife treat OP like garbage and kick OP out of his home. He made his choices, and now he's paying the price for them. OP does not owe him anything. It sounds like karma finally caught up to him, and it's only a question of time when it will catch Susan. I can't believe he thought it was okay to move his mistress in while OP's mother was dying. That's a level of cruelty that's just unforgivable. OP did the right thing by cutting him out of his life. And now let's hear the community's opinion. Honestly, the fact that your dad even moved Susan into the house while your mom was still alive is just beyond sick. What kind of person does that? And the audacity to expect you to just accept that and move on? It sounds like you've done a great job of building your life, despite everything they did to you. Now he's dealing with the fallout of his decisions, and that's on him, not you. You're definitely not the a-hole. I think cutting him off completely is the healthiest thing for you at this point. Don't let his guilt trips pull you back into that toxic mess. Not the a-hole. I'm so sorry you had to go through this. Losing a parent is already devastating, but watching your father act like that during your mom's illness must have been a nightmare. And to kick you out of your own home? That's just cold. The way Susan treated you, and the fact that your dad went along with it, says everything about his priorities. Now he wants you to help because he's been burned? Nah. Let him deal with the mess he created. You don't owe him anything, and you've already been through enough. This happened 2 years ago, and I still feel guilty over it, so I thought I would post it here to see if I was the a-hole or not. Our mom died when my sister was 19 and I was 10, so she practically raised me. Our dad left when I was a baby. She married her husband when she was 22, and I lived with him until I went to university. Her husband did a lot for us, including making sure my sister could finish her degree, which she had to drop out of after our parents died, to look after me. He has one major flaw, though, which is that he's a workaholic. He got really bad when his father announced he was going to retire soon, and he started actively grooming my brother-in-law to take over their family business. This meant my brother-in-law had to travel a lot more for his client meetings. My sister hated it, but sucked it up mostly. When my sister was pregnant, she called him while he was abroad and begged him to come back home because she was experiencing some cramping and she was scared something was wrong. He basically told her everything would be fine and he'd be home in a few days. It got worse and she tried to call him again, but his phone was switched off. She ended up calling me in tears because she was bleeding and he wasn't answering. I was away at university at the time and it took me a few hours to get back home. By that time, she was already at the hospital and knew she was miscarrying. My sister ended up packing her stuff and leaving their marital home after, and swore me to secrecy. She pretty much ghosted him. She still talked to me, and it was obvious she was depressed, and when I tried to convince her to talk to him or to talk to a therapist, she refused to. My brother-in-law was a mess, and after 2 weeks I ended up telling him where she was, because I felt sorry for him, and I was also worried about my sister. Things were really awful between them for a few months, and my sister resented me a lot for telling him where she was initially. But they did eventually manage to work things out. When she first saw me after he made her come home, she said I had betrayed her, and she wouldn't forgive me. I've told this story to a few people, and the general consensus was that I was an a-hole because I took the choice away from my sister, and it looked like I was favoring my brother-in-law. So, what's the verdict? You're the a-hole. She made you swear you wouldn't tell. She was alone during a miscarriage, a horrific time for a woman to be alone. He switched off his phone after she called, told him she was cramping, was scared, and needed him back. He ignored his pregnant, scared, and miscarrying wife for his work. She left because she needed time alone. He left her alone. He decided work was more important than his miscarrying, terrified wife. She asked you not to say anything. She wanted time, needed to be alone, was tired of being pushed aside for work, pushed aside during an emergency, mind you. You should have respected her wishes. Her wishes after she went through something so horrid alone and ignored. But because her husband, again, who decided work was more important than his terrified pregnant wife, was feeling bad she was gone, you spilled everything. He felt bad because he did something horribly wrong. That was how he was supposed to be feeling. But his feels were more important than your sister's request. You're the a-hole on every level. If a romantic relationship is bad enough that someone needs to escape and hide their whereabouts, your obligation is to stay out of it and protect privacy. You can't see what a relationship is like when you're not there. You very well could have put her at risk of harm. You may have sent her back into an aggressive relationship without your knowledge. You're the a-hole, big time. Just because your brother-in-law did a lot for you doesn't mean it was okay for you to betray your sister like that. She clearly wanted out. Sounds like your brother-in-law is controlling and doesn't care about her emotions. Both of you are a-holes. You may have felt you were acting out of love, but this is so crappy. If she ever needs to escape again, you should help her. So, I can't believe I'm posting to a bunch of strangers, but I really need an unbiased opinion on this. I have 2 children. Anna is 25 and James is 23. Anna has a 3-year-old daughter, and every year on her birthday, in addition to gifts, my husband and I deposit money in her college fund. We intend to keep doing this, and by the time she's ready for college, it should be all set. James has a son who just turned 1, and he is married to a woman I do not like. We'll call her Nicole. As a result of Nicole's boundaries and constant control, I don't feel very close to my grandson. I absolutely refuse to be manipulated, so I've taken a step back, and I'm very honest. I think she uses her child as a pawn, so I have a limited relationship with my grandson. I find Nicole very rude. She's implied that I'm not very intelligent because I grew up privileged. She's been very insulting to my husband, and he has no patience with her, which resulted in a screaming match at Thanksgiving, and she was asked to leave. She criticizes me for every little comment, and she says she doesn't feel comfortable with me babysitting. I don't care. That's her right. But then she calls me and asks for help with bills. I really can't deal with her hypocrisy. I did grow up very privileged, and she acts like it's wrong that I had everything handed to me by my father, and then has the audacity to ask me for money. The absolute vilest part of all this is she yelled at me once that you'd probably duck Anna's husband to feel young again. I'm not sure if she's jealous because I actually like him, but that is a disgusting accusation. We did send our grandson a nice birthday gift, but we didn't open up an account like we did for our granddaughter's first birthday. Well, that was about a week ago, and James called the other day, clearly very uncomfortable, and wanted to know when we were planning on putting the first payment in the savings account. I told him that his son is not automatically entitled to money just because we choose to give it to our granddaughter. I was honest and told him that I don't like Nicole, and that he knew marrying her was going to come with some repercussions. He got very emotional, thought that might have to do with the marital issues they've been having, and he accused me of favoring Anna. I don't love either of them over the other, but I am not going to get attached to a child they keep threatening not to let me see. So am I obligated to pay for my grandson's college? You're not obligated to pay for your grandson's college, but I would say everyone sucks here if you choose to lavish one grandchild with your financial patronage while denying the other just because you don't like his mom. Nicole's BS is not his fault, and you wouldn't be giving the money to her. It would be for your grandson. I think if you show this kind of favoritism, it will drive a wedge between you and your grandson as he gets older and realizes what's going on. Don't punish him for things that are outside of his control. So, she's supposed to pay for a grandchild who she can't even have a relationship with? Treating the grandchildren differently if they saw her the same amount would be a-holish. But if one is being kept from her, why is she expected to pay for his college? Would you shell out thousands for an acquaintance? Granted, this is not the grandchild's fault, but his mother and father have plenty of time to fix the relationship, and if they don't, they're the a-hole. And if OP happens to be some sort of just no mother-in-law nightmare, then the daughter-in-law should keep her distance and not go begging for money. You can't malign people in one breath and ask them for a handout in the next. Everyone sucks here. A great compromise would be to open a savings account in your own name, to place money into, where your daughter-in-law has no access. Then, when your grandson is older, you can explain that he has the financial support for college, but you and his mother don't see eye to eye, so you kept it safe for him. Nicole is crappy for her expectation of financial support while demeaning you for a life you were born into. But where she goes low, you can go high and do the right thing in a different way.